At 6:14 local time, above the steel-colored ice fields east of Greenland, the cockpit is silent in a way that feels heavy, not peaceful. The U.S. Navy aircraft cruises steadily at altitude, engines finely balanced, nose fixed on its route. Beyond the canopy, the sky is a deep, unforgiving blue, broken only by thin layers of cloud and the distant white shine of ice below. Visibility is clear. The weather is manageable. Nothing outside suggests that anything is about to go wrong. Then the alert sounds. A sharp electronic chirp snaps through the pilot's headset. Rear sector radar warning. The pilot's eyes shift instantly to the HUD. 2 contacts. Fast, extremely fast, approaching from behind and slightly below. No friendly transponder. No cooperative ID. Only raw speed and direction markers flashing across the display. Now every number matters. Closing speed climbing past 600 knots. Distance shrinking second by second. This is not random, not weather, not routine air traffic. This is a deliberate intercept. The pilot says nothing at first. His hands remain steady on the controls. Throttle unchanged. The aircraft stays exactly on course through the thin Arctic air, just as training demands. At this altitude and speed, any sudden move would be the wrong one. A quick look at the mirrors confirms it. 2 Russian fighter jets come into view, dark silhouettes against the sky. They are close enough now for the pilot to make out the shape of the wings, the shadows inside the intakes, the faint shimmer trailing from their engines. They are not keeping their distance. They are not simply observing. They are moving in. No radio call follows, no warning, no coordination on international frequencies. The silence is intentional, and in military aviation, silence speaks loudly. The pilot presses the mic. 2 fast contacts approaching from aft. No radio calls, no IFF. His voice stays even, controlled, stripped of emotion. On the other end, the command network is already tracking the same stream of data in real time. Every radar return, every heading change, every meter disappearing between the aircraft. Inside the cockpit, the world narrows. The rush of air grows slightly louder as the aircraft cuts through the high, cold atmosphere. Symbols on the HUD sharpen. Speed, altitude, heading, everything remains within normal limits. Everything still looks routine. That is exactly what makes the moment so tense. Then the Russian jets begin to reposition. One climbs higher and moves forward, angling toward the American aircraft's left side. The other hangs back to the right, staying just beyond the pilot's direct forward view. It is a textbook pressure formation. One aircraft obvious, the other lurking just enough to control space and focus. The distance falls below 1,000 meters. At these speeds, that gap is almost nothing. The pilot feels it. Not panic, not a rush of nerves, but heightened awareness. Every simulator session, every training sortie, every briefing on high-speed intercepts over freezing water clicks into place. The rule is simple. Do not react emotionally. Do not flinch. Do not hand over a mistake. The jet on the left inches closer, too close. Its nose pushes forward, drifting toward the American aircraft's path. Wake turbulence begins to ripple across the canopy, a faint vibration that should not be there. The safe margin is now measured in meters. At this speed, one abrupt roll, one bad throttle input, one overcorrection could send both aircraft into disaster over the Arctic. Still no radio call, still no acknowledgement. The pilot reports again, voice calm and precise. Lead contact maneuvering aggressively, closing inside safety limits. On the HUD, the closure rate jumps. The Russian fighter surges ahead, slicing nearer to the American aircraft's nose. Not a full crossing, not yet. But enough to make the message unmistakable, enough to force a choice. The pilot holds steady. Hands firm, course unchanged. The aircraft stays fixed on its original heading, cutting through the sky as though the intruding jets do not exist. Behind the scenes, onboard systems capture every detail, angles, emissions, movement patterns. But in the cockpit, the answer is simple: restraint. The Russian jet moves in even closer. For the briefest instant, its shadow sweeps across the nose of the American aircraft. Then the warning system flares again. Collision alert. The atmosphere inside the cockpit tightens instantly. Muscles tense. Instinct demands action. The pilot ignores it. This is the moment where discipline matters most. This is where training takes control before reflex can. And then, almost as quickly as it began, the Russian jet pulls up and peels away, climbing into the thin Arctic air and abandoning the line it had threatened to cross. The second fighter follows, easing back and opening the gap. The most immediate risk is gone. But the encounter is not over, because above the frozen edge of the North Atlantic, nothing like this happens by chance. And this was only the opening move. The airspace grows quieter, but the tension stays locked in place. The American aircraft continues on course, engines smooth, wings level. The Russian fighters have widened their spacing, yet they remain near enough to matter, near enough that one lapse in focus could turn a routine mission into a serious problem. Inside the cockpit, the pilot does not ease up. This is often when errors happen, not during the first shock, not at the point of closest approach, but afterward when the surge begins to fade and false confidence starts to settle in. That is why the rules are there. The pilot runs through the instruments with practiced precision. Airspeed stable, altitude steady, engine readings normal, flight controls responsive. Nothing inside the aircraft has changed. Only the air around it has become unpredictable. And that is exactly the kind of moment these procedures were built for. Hold course, hold speed, capture everything. The Russian fighters shift position again, one climbs higher, slightly ahead, and offset. The other drops lower and lingers farther back, just outside direct view. It is deliberate spacing, carefully arranged to squeeze the American aircraft's airspace without creating an obvious breach. Close enough to apply pressure, distant enough to deny clear intent. The pilot recognizes the pattern immediately. This is not random. This is method. He does not chase them with his eyes. He does not waste motion trying to follow every move. The aircraft comes first. Awareness comes from the instruments, not from impulse. The HUD keeps delivering clean, exact data. Relative bearing, closure rate, vertical separation. Numbers do not get distracted. Numbers do not bluff. Even when the behavior outside is meant to confuse, the data remains honest. A short transmission breaks through the headset. Command acknowledges the contact. No new orders, no shift in posture. That silence carries meaning too. In the US Navy, escalation is never driven by emotion. It follows procedure. Every pilot knows the thresholds by heart. How close becomes unsafe, what qualifies as hostile intent, when aggressive maneuvering crosses into something more serious. Those boundaries are learned long before a real intercept ever unfolds. The Russian fighters probe those boundaries carefully. They edge closer once more, then settle. One drifts sideways, matching speed, holding position just off the American aircraft's left wing. The distance is tight enough to feel deliberate, but still just within the limits of control. Any closer, and the disturbed air rolling off the fighter's wake becomes a genuine threat. Any closer, and there would be no margin left to recover from a mistake. The pilot stays exactly as he is. No sudden flare, no sharp correction, no visible response at all. From the outside, it might seem passive. Inside the cockpit, it is something else entirely. Measured control. In military aviation, that's one of the hardest things to master. Anyone can move the stick. Not everyone can choose not to. The recording systems continue their quiet work. Radar warning receivers pick up intermittent sweeps. Not a full lock, not a targeting spike, just enough signal to be noticed, just enough to send a message, "We see you." The pilot registers it mentally, but says nothing. There's no need to escalate the call. The data is already flowing, streamed in real time to analysts who are watching every detail unfold. The American aircraft remains steady, predictable. And here, predictability becomes an advantage. It limits the other side's options. It forces them to either disengage or take a clearer step forward, one that can't be brushed off later. The Russian formation tightens briefly, then eases again. A push, a pause, another probe. This is where experience makes the difference. A less controlled response, a slight bank, a surge in throttle, a reactive climb, would reshape the entire situation. It would introduce new angles, new uncertainties, new risks. It would turn controlled proximity into something far less stable. Instead, the pilot lets the moment stretch. The aircraft continues its path through the cold, thin air, unchanged and unaffected. With every second that passes without reaction, the dynamic begins to shift. The pressure slowly turns back on the side, applying it. Now the next move is theirs to decide. A few more seconds pass. The Russian jets hold their positions, but something has changed. The sharpness in their movements softens. Their spacing begins to widen, subtle but noticeable. The encounter hasn't ended, but it has settled. That's the goal. No warning shots, no tense radio exchanges, no visible show of force, just control. Because out here, far from carriers, far from immediate support, over water that offers no second chances, the aircraft that makes it through isn't the one that reacts first. It's the one that refuses to be pushed into reacting at all. And high above Greenland's frozen horizon, the rules are still holding. The geometry shifts once more. This time, the Russian fighters move with clear intent, but not all at once. Gradual adjustments. One edges forward slightly above the American aircraft's altitude. The other drops back and lower, just far enough to stay outside the pilot's direct field of view. It's a staggered setup designed to compress space, to create the sensation of being boxed in, without ever crossing a single, undeniable line. From inside the cockpit, it feels tight. From the systems, it looks different. Every move generates data. Every shift in altitude, speed, or angle leaves a measurable trace. The sensors on board the American aircraft are not just watching. They're processing, recording, interpreting in real time. The jet above sends out another radar sweep, not a lock. Not yet. Just a brief pulse across the spectrum. A light touch, deliberate and probing. The kind of move meant to unsettle without escalating. The warning receiver catches it instantly. The pilot does nothing. That decision matters. Any visible reaction would confirm that the pressure is having an effect. It would give meaning to the maneuver. Instead, the aircraft stays steady, offering no feedback, no acknowledgement. The signal is logged, time-stamped, and transmitted silently through the data link. Up here, the real exchange isn't visual, it's electronic. The Russian jets inch closer again, not dramatically, not recklessly, but enough to tighten the space around them. Their exhaust disturbs the airflow. Light turbulence ripples through the American aircraft, a subtle shake that serves as a reminder of how little margin exists at this speed. This is where pressure usually peaks. It's also where mistakes are most likely. The Russian pilot above edges forward once more, briefly aligning his nose with the forward quarter of the American aircraft. It is a calculated positioning move, the kind meant to project control and claim the upper hand without a single word. But in doing that, the Russian pilot reveals more than he likely intends. Another sweep, another emission. This one at a slightly different frequency, lingering a little longer. The American systems collect every bit of it. Each variation leaves a signature. Later, analysts on the ground will be able to replay these seconds almost frame by frame. How long the signal lasted, how precisely it followed, how it changed with angle and distance. Under pressure, repeated behavior creates patterns, and patterns are hard to hide. Then the lower Russian jet makes its move. It accelerates from behind, closing the distance quickly. Too quickly. Inside the American aircraft, the pilot feels the frame shudder again, this time with more bite. Wake turbulence slides under the wings, subtle but impossible to miss. The collision alert flashes, then disappears as the Russian pilot corrects at the last possible moment and slips off to the side. Too close. And that correction says everything. It suggests the situation is no longer perfectly controlled. It shows the margins are getting dangerously thin. It reveals that the pilot on the other side of the canopy is managing risk second by second, and that risk is rising. The American pilot still does not react. That calm is not accidental. It is pressure of a different kind. By refusing to maneuver, the American aircraft leaves the burden entirely on the Russian pilots. Every adjustment belongs to them now. Every near miss is theirs. Every risky move becomes part of their story to explain. The airspace grows tighter, but the American aircraft remains steady. That steadiness becomes its own kind of trap. The Russian pilots are waiting for a reaction, a brake, a climb, a turn, anything they can read as uncertainty. When none comes, the encounter loses momentum. Their options begin to shrink. Push closer and the danger becomes obvious. Ease off and the message starts to fade. So they push again. The lead Russian jet slides across the nose of the American aircraft, even closer than before. Not a full crossing, not an unavoidable path, but close enough to light up every warning system on board. The alert sounds again, and this time it hangs in the cockpit a little longer. The pilot feels his grip tighten for an instant, but his hands stay exactly where they are. The aircraft holds its line, cutting cleanly through the thin Arctic air. No abrupt move, no evasive brake. For a moment, the gap between them feels measured not in meters, but in heartbeats. Then the Russian jet climbs sharply and peels away, giving up the line it had been pressing. The second aircraft follows, opening its turn and widening the spacing. The formation loosens, and that reveals the truth. They have reached the limit of what they can safely manage. They have applied as much pressure as they can without inviting disaster. Now the risk is starting to outweigh the message. The American aircraft remains steady as the sky around it opens once more. In the background, the data stream is complete. Every maneuver, every emission, every pause recorded without drama. Nothing erupts out here, no flares, no radio confrontation, no visible spectacle. But the exchange is finished, and the side that tried to dominate the moment has revealed far more than it meant to. For a few seconds after the Russian jets widen their spacing, the sky feels almost open again. The American aircraft stays on course, engines smooth, attitude unchanged. But experience says moments like this rarely end when they seem to. Then it happens. The lead Russian fighter comes back hard. No gradual drift, no slow approach. One instant it is offset and climbing, and the next it rolls sharply and drops across the American aircraft's forward path. The closure rate jumps immediately. The distance collapses from hundreds of meters to only a few dozen. This is no longer a show of presence. This is a razor-thin pass. The collision alert erupts again, louder this time, harder to ignore. Visual cues flash across the HUD, marking out a narrow corridor of safe air that is shrinking with every second. The disturbed wake from the Russian jet roughens the airflow over the wings. The aircraft trembles, not wildly, but enough to make the danger unmistakable. At this speed, there is no space for improvisation. Every instinct tells the pilot to act. A hard bank, a quick pitch change, anything to create room. But instinct is exactly what turns moments like this into disaster. Training takes over, hands stay fixed, throttle stays where it is. The aircraft holds its line, trusting physics, trusting discipline, trusting margins, calculated long before this encounter ever began. The Russian jet cuts across the nose. For the briefest instant, it fills the forward view. Intake, fuselage, wing route, details burned into memory, not because of spectacle, but because of how close they are. The clearance is terrifyingly small. A meter or two less, and neither aircraft leaves that sky intact. The Russian pilot pulls back hard. The jet pitches up sharply, climbing straight through the American aircraft's path, its exhaust washing over the canopy in a violent shimmer. The turbulence hits fast and heavy. The aircraft jolts, then steadies as the control systems absorb the disturbance. And then, silence. Not just over the radio, total silence. No alerts, no tones, just the steady hum of the engines and the thin rush of air along the canopy. The American pilot exhales slowly, not out of relief, out of focus, because the situation isn't finished yet. The second Russian fighter lingers behind and below, holding position as if weighing its next move. Waiting, watching. This is the moment where situations like this can spiral. One reaction leads to another. A turn becomes pursuit. Pursuit becomes intent. But nothing changes. The American aircraft does not chase. It does not climb. It does not attempt to reclaim space. It simply continues forward, steady and unchanged, giving the moment no new momentum. That decision defines everything. The Russian jet below begins to drift outward, slowly at first, then more clearly. The distance increases, its movement steadies. The posture shifts. Less pressure, more caution, a quiet reassessment in motion. Above, the lead Russian jet levels off, now well clear of the American aircraft's path. It does not return to the earlier positioning. The pattern has broken. Inside the cockpit, the pilot reports in a calm, even tone. Unsafe pass observed. Separation increasing. No emotion, just facts. The command network receives it instantly. Analysts monitoring the live feed see the same picture unfold. The encounter has reached its peak and moved past it. The most aggressive move has already happened, and it didn't produce the reaction it was meant to trigger. That matters. Up here, intent isn't judged by words. It's defined by movement, distance, speed, repetition. The pass across the nose wasn't accidental. It was a choice, and once made, it becomes part of the record. Now the airspace begins to open. The Russian fighters continue to pull away, their movements smoother, less confrontational. They remain visible, but the tension has faded. The edge is gone. The moment has passed. The American aircraft flies on. No dramatic maneuver, no commentary. Just a controlled continuation of the mission. That restraint sends its own message. This didn't end in spectacle, it ended in control, holding steady under pressure until the pressure faded. High above the frozen horizon, the most critical moment is already behind them. But what follows matters just as much. The Russian fighters drift farther away, their shapes shrinking against the pale Arctic sky. They don't rush off, they don't need to. Their presence has already been felt. The signal has already been delivered. Now it becomes about how the encounter is understood and who defines it. Inside the American cockpit, nothing changes. Altitude holds. Heading remains fixed. Engines run smooth and constant. The pilot doesn't turn to watch them leave. There's no need. The systems confirm everything. Separation is increasing. Closure rates have leveled out. The airspace is clear again. The immediate risk is over, but the event itself is still unfolding, just in a different place. Because moments like this aren't decided only in the sky. Behind the scenes, the entire encounter is already being rebuilt in precise detail. Every second of flight, every shift in bearing, every radar emission, from the first warning tone to the final separation, it has all been captured. This is the part most people never see. Modern aerial encounters continue long after the aircraft move apart. They are examined in analysis rooms, intelligence centers, and operations hubs, where raw data is turned into insight. The Russian pilots came close, closer than necessary. They pushed limits, tested spacing, and operated with minimal margin for error. On the surface, it may have looked like confidence, like control, like a demonstration of presence. But there is always another side to that exchange. Every approach angle reveals discipline. Every correction shows how the aircraft responds under pressure. Every movement leaves behind a trace of behavior that can be studied later. Every radar pulse, no matter how brief, left its mark. Patterns started to take shape. Habits became visible. The closer the Russian jets moved, the more they revealed through the electromagnetic spectrum. And the American aircraft never needed to respond in kind. That silence was intentional. In naval aviation, restraint isn't a lack of capability. It's control over when and how that capability is used. By holding course and refusing to react on impulse, the American pilot narrowed the situation into a tight corridor, one where any further move would force the Russian pilots to take on greater risk. Eventually, they chose not to, and that decision speaks for itself. The final close pass, the one that triggered collision alerts and forced a sharp climb, was the turning point. It showed just how thin the margin had become, how close the situation had come to something far more serious. From that moment, the outcome was already set. The Russian fighters didn't pull away because they were forced out, and not because they were chased. They disengaged because continuing no longer made sense. The risk of miscalculation had grown too high, and the American aircraft had given them nothing to work with. Up here, leverage comes from reaction. They got none. As the American aircraft continues forward, the Arctic stretches endlessly below. Ice, dark water, no safe place to land, no immediate help nearby. This is exactly why discipline matters so much in regions like this. A single mid-air collision wouldn't just be an incident. It would turn into a complex recovery effort measured in days, not minutes. Both sides understand that. And that understanding is often what keeps these encounters from going too far. On this flight, it held. No weapon systems were activated, no countermeasures released, no warnings broadcast over open channels. The aircraft simply stayed on mission, recorded everything, and moved through the airspace the same way it entered. Calm, controlled, deliberate. From the outside, it might seem uneventful. No dramatic visuals, no obvious confrontation. Just aircraft crossing paths in the sky. But for those who know how these operations work, the outcome is clear. One side tried to apply pressure by getting close. The other absorbed that pressure through discipline. One relied on visible moves. The other relied on procedure. Only one of those approaches holds up over time. As the Russian jets fade into the distance, the American aircraft remains focused on its task. Routine checks resume. Fuel, navigation, systems, all returning to a steady rhythm. But when this flight is reviewed later, it won't be considered routine. Because high above Greenland's frozen horizon, a boundary was tested and held. Pressure was applied and not returned. And in that restraint, a quiet edge was gained. No announcement will follow, none is needed. In modern aerial encounters, the advantage doesn't belong to the aircraft that gets closest. It belongs to the one that never has to.